You're in your 50s or close to it. You've watched 2 generations after you turn ink into a near-universal rite of passage. Your kids have tattoos. Your kids' friends have tattoos. People you went to high school with finally got one in their 40s because everybody else was. And somewhere along the way, you noticed something quiet about yourself. You never wanted one. You never almost got one. The thought just never sat right in your body. And for years, you've half wondered why. If you're Gen X and you've never gotten a tattoo, and the rest of the culture seems to have made body modification into a kind of generational requirement that you somehow opted out of without trying, there's a very specific psychology behind that. And it isn't aesthetic conservatism, it isn't fear of needles, it isn't even really about tattoos. It's about something much older than the trend, something about how your sense of self got built in a decade the rest of the world barely remembers anymore. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Tattoos in the modern era function as a specific kind of psychological tool. They externalize identity, taking something internal, a memory, a meaning, a belief, a phase of your life, and making it visible to other people. For most of the past 20 years, this externalization has felt natural, even necessary, because the broader culture has been organizing itself around external display. Instagram, LinkedIn, personal brands. Identity has shifted from something you carried privately to something you signaled publicly. But Gen X formed before that shift. You came of age in a decade where identity was something that happened mostly inside you, not on you. There was no platform asking you to perform your inner life. Your sense of yourself got built in private, in a room nobody else could see into. And once it was built, it didn't require external confirmation to feel real. That's not a small developmental fact. That's a generational signature most people no longer have access to. In the 1950s and 1960s, psychologist Erik Erikson published his foundational work on identity formation, identifying adolescence as the developmental window where identity either consolidates or stays fragmented. Erikson argued that healthy adult identity required time spent in private exploration, time where the self could be tried on, taken off and rebuilt without an audience watching the process. Sociologist Christian Smith, working through the 2000s and 2010s, extended Erikson's work into the modern era. He found that cohorts who came of age before social media completed their identity consolidation earlier and reported a stronger sense of internal self-coherence than cohorts who came of age during the platforms. The constant performance demands of digital culture had quietly disrupted the private formation window Erikson described as essential. Gen X is the last cohort that finished the consolidation before the disruption. By the time the internet arrived, your identity was already built. By the time Instagram arrived, your identity didn't need a feed. Picture this. It's 1989. You're 17. You've just made some decision about who you are. Maybe you're the kid who likes a particular kind of music. Maybe you're the kid who's quietly figured out you don't believe what your parents believe anymore. The decision lives inside you. You haven't posted it. You haven't announced it. You haven't even told your closest friend yet. It just exists in you, fully formed. The way an opinion sits in a person who's never been asked to defend it publicly. 3 months later, that decision is still there, and it doesn't need anything to keep it alive. It doesn't need a community of people validating it online. It doesn't need a symbol on your skin reminding you. It just is what you are. That's the formative experience nearly every Gen Xer had, in their own version, and it's the experience nobody who came after you has ever fully been able to replicate. You learn to be a person without a platform. But here's where it gets interesting. The absence of a tattoo isn't about not wanting to commit to something permanently. It's the opposite. Tattoos function as a way to make something feel permanent by making it visible. People who get them often describe the act as locking something in, but you didn't develop a need for that kind of locking in, because the things that mattered to you got locked in internally, in adolescence, by simply being there long enough without anyone asking you to prove they were. Permanence was already a feature of how you formed. You didn't need to add it with a needle. But there's more going on than just identity timing. Gen Xers who never got a tattoo tend to have an unusually grounded relationship to memory. You don't need to mark a person's death on your arm to remember them. You don't need a phrase on your wrist to remember a meaning. The memory just lives where memories used to live, before the culture started suggesting they had to be displayed to count. This isn't sentimentality, it's the residual capacity of a generation that learned to hold things internally, because external infrastructure for holding things didn't yet exist. And here's the kicker. The same internal formation pattern that made you the Gen Xer who never wanted a tattoo also made you uniquely resistant to identity by performance. You can sit in a room full of people performing themselves and not feel pulled to perform back. You can spend an afternoon alone without needing to post about how peaceful it was. You can have a strong opinion without feeling the urge to process it through other people's reactions before you trust it. That's a generation whose sense of self doesn't require an audience to remain intact. And this shows up in ways you might not even notice. Gen Xers who never got a tattoo tend to be the people other generations quietly orient around in moments of cultural confusion. The millennial colleague overwhelmed by identity discourse comes to you for perspective. The Gen Z relative exhausted by performing themselves online treats time with you like a small vacation from the obligation. You don't always realize why people gravitate toward your steadiness. The reason is that you are walking proof that identity can be a thing you have, rather than a thing you constantly broadcast. Now let's be honest, the trait has a real cost. The same internal formation pattern that makes you steady can also make you less expressive about meaningful things than the people around you would sometimes prefer. The relationships you hold most carefully are sometimes held so privately that the people in them don't always feel the weight of what they mean to you. There's an asymmetry between how much something matters to you internally and how much you signal it externally. That asymmetry can quietly confuse the people you love most. But for the Gen Xers who never got a tattoo and have started to wonder if that means something, here's what it actually means. You belong to the last generation that completed the work of identity formation before the culture started demanding the work be done in public. You have a kind of internal coherence that the cohorts after you have spent their entire adult lives trying to recover. You can hold a meaning without externalizing it. You can carry a memory without displaying it. You can be a person without performing one. The lack of ink isn't a missed milestone. It's the visible signature of a developmental advantage you don't always recognize you have. The work isn't to start performing yourself now. It's to recognize that the steady, unmarked, internally formed version of you is something the rest of the culture is quietly trying to find its way back to. There's something quietly remarkable about Gen Xers who never got a tattoo. They walk through ordinary days carrying a sense of self that doesn't need to be visible to be real. They remember the people they've loved without writing the names on their bodies. They hold their beliefs in the same place beliefs used to live, before that place started shrinking for everybody else. If you've ever wondered what it means that you never wanted one, when so many of the people around you did, this might be why. You finished becoming yourself before the world started requiring you to show it your work. That's the part of you the next several generations are going to spend a lot of money trying to develop. You're not aesthetically conservative, you're not afraid of needles, you're not behind the times. You're someone whose sense of self consolidated in a private decade, and the absence of ink is the visible signature of an interior life the rest of the culture is trying to remember how to build. If you nodded through any part of this, subscribe to Silent Awareness. There's a lot more about the quietly different ways your mind and your generation work, and most of it nobody's named yet. Subscribing helps the channel keep making these, and lets you know when the next one is ready.